You're listening to the Diginauts on the Good Talk Podcast Network.
Greetings, people of Earth. You have found the Diginauts. This week, we're going to be discussing bringing woolly mammoths back from extinction. Should we? Shouldn't we? Have we learned anything from Jurassic Park?
Should a consortium come up with guidelines around the uses and research of AI?
And if you have somebody confessing on tape that they committed a crime, should they be prosecuted for that crime? They weren't in the case of Gamergate, and we're going to talk about that today, right after this. Society.
The future.
Morality.
Disruption.
Policy.
Humanity.
Innovation.
Technology.
Probably voice recognition software out there saying, like, beep, beep, beep. He said something negative about 4chan. Get him. We are anonymous. We will kick your ass.
Diginauts.
Hey there, you found the Diginauts. This is episode 16. Eric and I just didn't record a little bit of small talk up top about how scary the nuclear world is. I sat down and realized it's been 2 weeks since we recorded. We took a week off in there, just owing to some scheduling stuff. And the last time we spoke, it was like, oh, Fukushima is melting down and sending radiation into the Pacific Ocean. And I sort of just forgot about that off of all the stuff of that's happened. My theory is we're in some sort of giant government experiment where they're just checking to see if they crank up our anxiety levels a little bit every day, what's going to happen.
Nice.
But we're going to talk about topics that may very well raise people's anxiety as well as we speak to the future. But also some stuff that's pretty darn cool and a fair number of stories that are both. So top of mind this week, what do we got?
Yep. So if you recall years ago, there was a movie called Jurassic Park.
Oh my, let me see. Is that the one with the bridges in that county, Madison County? Is that the one? Do I have that confused?
A little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So imagine dinosaurs coming back.
Right.
Right? But this one's not a whole amusement park full of dinosaurs. Some scientists out of Harvard are ultimately trying to create a hybrid between a woolly mammoth and an elephant.
Yeah, so this is what they're calling de-extinction
Yep.
of the mammoths, which is a bit of a misnomer. But it comes back to our friend CRISPR, which is the advancement recently in genetic splicing. Splicing is probably a fair term. I'm not sure exactly what splicing means, but I think that's probably a fair term. And they use the term that you can cut and paste genes. So that sounds like splicing.
Yeah, kind of like Legos.
Yeah, and so with the mammoths, they're not full on hey, it's not the Jurassic Park something DNA that we found is frozen in amber, we're just going to magically bring it back to life. But they're essentially taking what they know of mammoth DNA and then laying it on top of elephant DNA. Is that the plan?
Yep. And they actually use the word splice. They take the mammoth DNA and they splice it into the elephant genome.
Okay. So we get these kind of in between I think there was a name for them, mammothants or something like that.
Yeah, the mammothant.
Yeah. So and this was published in the Guardian. There was a big article about it at the Guardian. It's been a few different places. I assume half a press release. And then Popular Science came back right afterwards and said, no, we are actually not going to have mammoths. Stop saying stuff like that. Because the initial claims were in 2 years, they'll be running around. And
yeah, definitely aggressive.
Right.
And there's other things, they don't want to put it in an elephant's womb.
Right.
They basically are going to try and create an artificial womb, of which they've never tried this before with the mammothants, right? But I guess they've tried it with mice and it lived or it existed for 10 days and that was it.
Oh, really?
So obviously they've tried it with rodents. They're going to try it with the mammothant.
So that's the gestation period. Yeah. So mice go from embryo to baby mouse in 10 days. But elephants are actually
way
longer
longer
than humans.
than that.
They're almost 2 years. So they've got to get, so that's the thing. And this is what the Popular Science rebuttal was saying was, yeah, enthusiastic scientist. It's nice that you said that you feel like you'll be able to develop an embryo, but they kind of start to parse words on a little bit and say, but will you produce a viable embryo? And will you have the technology to bring that, entity from embryo to calf? Is that what you call a mammothant? A
I'm not
young
sure.
mammothant?
You'd have to ask Caveman.
Well, they've never existed before. Let's be clear about that.
Well,
too,
okay,
right?
fair.
I mean, we're
Fair.
Frankensteining a new organism. So we can decide that it's called a calf or a kid or a Joey or whatever we want to call it.
That's fair.
So and this has nothing to do with the ethics side of this,
Right.
right?
And-
So we've yet to have the public debate about whether or not we should be.
I mean, in reality, like they're forging forward, independent of
Right.
public opinion, which is interesting nonetheless.
But this is the thing about science. That's what's always going. There's always going to be a mad scientist in a castle on a cliff somewhere.
Yep. And a couple scientists have objections along those lines, right? There's ethics across the board, right? I guess the true mammoths and even elephants are social in nature, right? So they're like, well, wait a minute. If this thing isn't socialized, how is it going to interact once it meets an elephant?
Right.
Will it fight? Will it, hang out? Will it be friendly? Who knows?
So they intend to introduce it into an elephant herd. Is that the idea?
I'm not sure, but if you think about it, like, what if something goes wrong and it gets loose and we lose it? A little hypothetical, right? Like, how do you lose a mammothant?
That is the plot of every Jurassic Park movie, though. So it's understandable that would be what we'd be worried about.
Right. So
I was reading the interview with one of the chief scientists on this idea, and he seemed to be way down the road on it. He was like, oh yeah, see, the mammoths will help reverse global climate change because they're going to help punch through the permafrost and help the trees.
Come on, of all the reasons to bring a mammothant to life, I don't think that's the number one
It's just that's
reason.
the way we're going to solve everything.
I mean,
no, thank you.
If mammothants would produce interesting and tasty meat, maybe that's
Sure.
feed the homeless.
New industry, yeah. And in theory, they would live in very, very sparsely populated areas.
Right.
Like permafrost is not exactly, we're talking Siberia, Mongolia, upper Canada, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not, yeah, sure. Meat source out of, I guess maybe it punches the permafrost, but if anything, we know the permafrost is unfrosting. So anyway, but that was just no, dude,
Yeah,
make your scary Frankenstein monster
too much
animal
of a
if you want
tangent.
to, but don't try to pretend that you're
saving
the world with your freak science. Yeah, exactly. I'm torn on this one. This really seems in general, pure science has to happen, right? Because you have to just see.
Yeah, I say let it happen. I'm not against it. I think they just have to. They can't let the mammothant they can't lose the mammothant.
Right.
Yeah,
you can't introduce that into the wild and see what happens.
Right.
Yeah, if they lose it and then suddenly it's breeding and then unknown effects. But that's my thing. If you can't lose it, if you're worried enough that you can't lose it and let it go because something could go wrong, right? Because you are by definition releasing, or if it goes away, you're introducing a non-indigenous species,
right,
by definition, because the species has never existed. It is therefore non-indigenous, no matter where you put it. And so that almost never goes well. There's no invasive species there where they're like, oh, good,
right.
now we have these, and that just restabled our ecosystem. Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's the other thing, right? As soon as you start with the mammoth, my other thing that I was thinking as I was learning more about this whole experiment was, why start with a mammoth? It's got to be just because it's sexy, flash, and sparkle. But to me, a proper scientist, mammoths were on this planet, the last ones they think died out 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, or they were at their peak tens and 20s of thousands of years ago, go get a freaking carrier pigeon and bring those back, right? Like let's stick to the most recent century, because you're going to do the least ecological damage with something that, I mean, the golden tree frog went extinct, they think, in the like 80s. We've got some laying around somewhere, I'm sure, in some museum. Like, go use something that's been dead for 20 years, or I mean, yeah, and yes, they are doing cloning, so we know that's going on. But like giraffes or something, right? They've just moved to threatened levels or endangered levels. Let's go save some giraffes. That's my opinion. So I thought this was a good top of mind story for our first segment, because we literally, every single Jurassic Park movie, you bring them back, they run wild, and a bunch of people get their heads bitten off. Is the mammoth going to do that? Probably not at first. I don't know, but there's always an Act 3 plot twist, and I don't want to see what it is in this case. That's my take, but no one asked me. That's going to be my new tagline. You ready for your
Nice.
Every segment's going to end with, but no one asked me.
Do you have more employees than phone numbers and extensions? Is your company growing above and beyond your existing telephony infrastructure? If so, you should bring on Grasshopper. Easily deploy, phone system in the cloud, maintain it, upgrade, etc. Go to goodtalknetwork.com/ads and look for Grasshopper. Click on that and you'll be on your way.
All right, so today, segment 2, we have a new installment of the Future File for you. And today, it's a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. It's artificial intelligence, a subject we talk about so often that we'll actually be talking about it again in later segments in the show today. There's a new statement from Elon Musk on humans and computers merging that was interesting that we wanted to talk about, but more on that later. For now, there was a committee of scientists, an association of scientists. They have put together a series of 23 principles to guide future research into AI. And it's just an attempt to make sure that we don't turn into a cowering race of mammals trying to avoid being shot down by Terminators in caves for the resistance.
So I guess my question would be, 23 is a lot, right?
Yeah.
Furthermore, how'd they go about choosing these?
Yeah, so it was a big old collection of folks. They gathered at Asilomar State Park in California, and essentially it was key players in the space of AI. Larry Page from Google was there. They've had the whole thing. They then took what they got and brought it to other scientists. So I guess Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk have looked this over and said, "Yep, you're on the money." And their process was they talked it through, and for a principle to be included, there was 100 or so attendees. They had to get a 90% approval.
Interesting.
So you had to be at A- level or better in order to be included on the list. And it's interesting. Like you say, 23. That seems like a lot. You think of the famous Asimov's laws of robotics, right? Like there's 3 of them, so it's nice and easy to remember. Granted, that lives in the world of fiction,
right? And
he's boiling it down to some really, really simple stuff. But there's a reason that they were very all encompassing. Like I used to run summer camps for kids, and in my introductory speech, we were all supposed to give a speech where we'd go through our rules, and I would say all right, there's one rule. It's don't do anything you think I don't want you to do. And that worked remarkably well, right? The kids would all be like, oh yeah, he might not want us to do that. And then there you go. And I think that's kind of the catch-all nature of Asimov's laws. I had to look them back up because I could remember that one of them was, the first and most important was, you can't do anything that kills a human, right? So even if you have to jump in front of a train. And then the where Asimov was clever is you can't do anything, you can't take any action that will kill a human or by inaction, allow a human to be killed, right? So the robot, rule number 1, don't ask about Fight Club, literally has to throw itself in front of a bus in order to help the bus not hit a human.
Right.
That was law number 1. Law number 2 was you have to do whatever humans say. That's the one I forgot. A little slavey, I gotta say, right? But
what if I say kill Darren, robot?
Unless, and this is, each of his rules was stacked. So each of his rules was you have to do rule number 1, then you have to do rule number 2 unless it breaks rule number 1, and then you have to do rule number 3 unless it breaks rule number 2 or rule number 1. So yes, they will follow any human order that doesn't endanger another human, which you would think would introduce all sorts of gray area, right? Like that's the nature of all.
Yeah, well, if it jumps in front of the bus and kills the bus driver.
Right. Exactly. Well, no, that's exactly right, right? So in theory, their trillions of calculations per second would weigh those risks and work it out. He was writing novels, not guiding our society, and that's why he had 3 and not 23.
Did you say the third?
The third then is that they can't do anything to hurt themselves unless it gets in the way of the other 2. So if you tell them to jump off a cliff, they have to because rule number 2 is more important than rule number 3. But they can't just decide to self-destruct. And I don't know enough of his robot literature to know why that's a rule. Why is the robot sitting around being I know, I think I'll what's up with suicidal robots? I guess is my question. But it must have been more of a guideline for everyday living. If anybody listening knows the Asimov application for the third rule, I would love to hear about it. I'll look it up on my own, but even better is if you just tell me the answer. So, but yeah, so they went through and came up with quite a few, and they broke them into 3 main categories. The first was research issues, the second was ethics and values, and the third was longer-term issues. We'll put a link to them on the site, but there's a few key ones that we should probably call out. The interesting thing is, they kind of slapped a don't be evil on the top. So rule number 1 is the goal of AI research should be to create not undirected intelligence, but beneficial intelligence. So they frame it from the very beginning as hey, let's do this for good.
Right.
As opposed to let's just do this and see what happens. Let's not just make a mammothant and see if we want one. Let's decide that we need mammothants for a better reason and then see if we can make them.
So are there any that you don't agree with?
Well, they've all been thought through pretty well. And they all are getting at nuances. So I just mentioned, number 1 was research goal. Number 2 is research funding. And it's hey, all that funding should always be for beneficial uses, right? So they thought it through enough that it's almost boring to go through the rules, right? But there's cool nuances to it as well. So, for example, they said, when you do your funding for those beneficial uses, you also have to do the side gray area, like we talked about that Carnegie Mellon grant. Actually, I can't remember whether we talked about that on the show or whether we talked about it between the two of us. But there's a grant recently coming out of or involving Carnegie Mellon and to do research in robotics, but it was all about sort of the ethical side of things. So some of the things we talk about, your example just now, should that robot save my life if it's my robot? But what if that means that it's going to endanger the bus driver? And what if there's a 2% chance of endangering the bus driver and a 98% chance of saving me, right? So we're the kind of ethical considerations around those things. So they're saying you can't just research it. You can, you have to also do all this other stuff. So they did a good job of introducing rules that make sense for level-headed scientists. If there's anything I disagree with, to answer your question, it's the goody two-shoes unenforceability of the whole thing, right? So, for example, rule number 5 is race avoidance. Teams developing AI systems should actively cooperate to avoid corner cutting on safety standards. That is a wonderful thought. We live in a capitalist society, and right, like there's no like, oh no, it's cool. You guys go first, right? Like it's fine if we're second to market as long as we've upheld the standards of the 23 rules. AI systems should be designed and operated so as to be compatible. I'm reading Rule 11, be compatible with ideals of human dignity, rights, freedoms, and cultural diversity.
It seems a lot of these seem subjective.
Yeah, well, they're fluffy, and that's part of that's what I mean when I say like unenforceable. And exactly, you're right that like one guy's compatible with human dignity, right, is another guy's affront to religious freedom or whatever. Obviously, we see this playing out all the time. I was happy to see AI arms race on there. An arms race in lethal autonomous weapons should be avoided. It's kind of like, well, yes, yes, it should. But like,
Probably
you have
late.
To write that down.
Too late.
Oh, we know it's too late, right? We talked about the DARPA research being done on drones that go in and take out buildings. And if we're doing that research, there's 200 some countries on the globe. And they can't all have nuclear weapons, and they can't all have an air force, but they can all make drones that shoot guys with guns. So like I say, I think the rules that they made make sense. And even the way they broke it down and said, look, we're going to have some fundamentals. You can almost kind of look at the research ones as like, okay, those are the real main rules, and the next sections are kind of corollaries. But it's good that they delineated all these, ethics ones, because you can at least have that. I guess the way I look at it is, in the future, we're going to have all sorts of legal cases come up. And if we could enact this on a national or global level, then that could function as a kind of Bill of Rights,
Right.
against which cases could be measured. I think that's the value here. I didn't think that before, but you asked me the question, and now I'm thinking out loud that like, yeah, that's why you do something like this, right? I mean, it's also not super enforceable that everyone should have the right to free speech and everyone should have the right to freedom of religion, unless you make that rule number 1 and you judge every law that comes after based on whether or not it meets that standard. So. That's what I think this is good for. And we'll have to just, have the governments of the world weigh in on that. At least that's what I think. But nobody asked me. That was my tagline, right? I forgot. Hey, did you know that this podcast is part of goodtalknetwork.com? If you go to that website, you can have your choice of ways that you can follow us. I don't know, maybe you're a Twitter person. Well, we're on there, twitter.com/goodtalknetwork. Anytime you want to comment to us, you can just hit us up directly by tweeting to @goodtalknetwork. Or, of course, you can talk to me or Eric individually. We'd love to hear from you.
We're going to dive into the segment that we call jurisprudence, where, in reality, society and law really don't mesh well together. They don't keep up with one another, and they're often just well out of balance. In this incident, years ago, like around 2013, 2 women who were in the gaming industry came upon just mass, vile threats, communication aimed at them. You name it, people said it and sent it their way.
A mighty army of basement rats.
Exactly.
Attacked these women.
Like, unfettered, unvetted, you name it, they said it.
So we're talking about Gamergate, and go look it up and check out what it was about. Let's not give it too much oxygen.
Yeah.
But the basics behind it were that there were some assertions made. There were accusations of a game developer getting unfair amounts of press. A whole lot of gender ensued, and a whole lot of misogyny got piled on top of that. And when you wake 4chan and Reddit and some of these other corners of the internet where people with way too much time will jump all over things, they'll probably come after us. There's probably voice recognition software out there saying, like, beep, 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 he said something negative about 4chan. Get him. We are anonymous. We will kick your ass.
You know what? I've been doxxed before.
Have you?
I have. Locally. And
Okay.
it's like, you know what? At first I was like, okay, that's not cool, right? Which I still wasn't a fan of it. But guess what? It didn't fucking matter.
Okay.
Like, you can go publish my fucking, what kind of car I drive, what color my fucking car is, the history of my property deed. Like, great, you can access public info.
Right. As could anybody.
Right.
Thanks for putting it all in one place, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, the scary thing would be if somebody's hacking deeper and they get you, anyway.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Guys like us, we're not the ones who have to worry about anything. Hell, here's my address. Anyway.
1, opt-out lane.
Exactly. That's weird. So anyway, we've got the Gamergate situation in the background, and then what's the recent jurisprudent consideration?
Yeah, based on a Freedom of Information Act request, people have requested the FBI files on the case because as a result of the vile things that were said, emailed, and posted online about these two women and the threats towards them, it became a criminal investigation. So the FBI became involved, and recently the papers have been published and the files have been published, but heavily redacted, right? So we have to take this with a lot of salt, but good Lord, it's very telling. So there were a couple interesting revelations from the published documents. One, the FBI successfully identified at least 4 men that they believed were responsible for the dozens of death threats, rape threats to the women who criticized video games, right? Furthermore, they identified the vehicles by which they did a lot of this, notably 4chan and 8chan and a wealth of websites linked to distribution of child pornography. And that was largely, used to organize this whole movement against these women. They even got to the point where 2 men confessed to doing the things that ultimately the FBI was after, trying to identify who's doing it. 2 men confessed to many of these things that they saw happening, right? But the FBI didn't arrest them. No charges were pressed. So it immediately begs the question, what the fuck, right? I mean, pretty much. It's like, why? Once you have a confession, a conviction is easy. Is this one of those things where, like you see on TV, someone says, oh, that's okay, I don't want to press charges? Does the victim have to be involved in let's go get them? Or, I would think by the time you reach this level, it's just in the FBI's best interest to kind of clean up the mess and say, by the way, by way of example, you're not allowed to tell people that you're going to kill them. In any form of communication. Right? Yeah. Let alone one that can be archived and found. Right. So a lot of people asked the U.S. Attorney's Office, especially in Boston, and they ultimately declined the prosecution of the matter, as a quote. Now, the office out of Boston didn't give any reason or explanation for that. How convenient, right? When pressed. And furthermore, the FBI, their San Francisco office, was really leading this investigation, and they claimed to have not had the respective state jurisdiction in Massachusetts and felt they couldn't pursue the chargers locally. Now, that's kind of some weak reasons for, how it ended. Well, or where we are now, so to speak. Because we have made the counter argument to this, right? That if
like if you have to get your email released in a case and it's on national or global servers, that they shouldn't be able to jump jurisdiction to another place in order to, like, well, my Massachusetts judge won't agree, but I'll get a Texas judge to give me access to the servers, right? So it makes sense that you can't play that game. So in some level, if the law enforcement in Massachusetts can't make the case in Massachusetts, I mean, I disagree with what I'm saying. Like, I think at the end of the day, right, it's two different situations completely,
right.
and you know, it should always fall back to, hey, let's land on the side of civil liberty. But you know, there is kind of a logic argument to be made there that, well, if you can't get to global servers from a local jurisdiction in one case, it should theoretically apply to another. But it doesn't sound like that's really what they were even saying here.
I mean, to me, let's back up to like I'll call the rationale of these lunatics, right? These women were at times criticizing video games, and the gamers revolted, right? You know, this supposedly went on for 9 months. Death threats, doxing of the women, phone calls, swatting, where they call in fake 911 calls to, you know, go to their address and claim that there's a real hostage situation.
Wow.
Right? These women's lives were continually disrupted, you know, unnecessarily so, right? Just over video games. It's kind of ludicrous.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I have heard people make deeper complaints into the fair use of blah blah blah, but it doesn't matter. The main case of, like, hey, that's not fair, what happened, got so muddied so quickly by the immaturity of you know, hordes of juvenile, whether that is meant literally or as an adjective, juvenile-minded, just an army of bad guys, basically.
Yeah, so I think there's some interesting things that ultimately came out of this. So one, obviously, reading through the FBI files on this. Secondly, Brianna Wu, one of the women who was, you know, abused online
From the
and
original.
offline,
Yeah.
exactly. She's rightfully so fed up with the situation after reading these documents that she's ultimately going to run for Congress in the state of Massachusetts.
Oh, good for her.
On a platform, right, of reforming the law to better prevent, like, online harassment.
Wow.
So that, I think that is awesome and probably one of the best outcomes of this all. And I think furthermore, and again, this is completely in line with the whole purpose of this segment of our podcast, in that within the file itself, the FBI wrote things like, they spelled tweeter, Tweeter,
Wow.
which is basically like, guys, like, you could have fucking Googled it and figured out the right spelling. Like, I think they're so out of touch. I think that inherently also caused issues with this.
Yeah. So part of why they may not be reacting to the severity of the harassment is that they don't understand the pervasiveness of what people are able to do, especially to people who work in technology.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a couple things to that, right? Like, if you work for the FBI, and I assume they have some sort of, I'm going to guess it's called cyber, just because it would be an out-of-touch label for that area. You know, like CSI Cyber or whatever it is.
Right,
right. That's clearly a show for people in their 60s who kind of accept those. They'll accept a situation where somebody's sitting at the desk and says, hey, can you enhance that image for me? Oh, let me see. Here you go.
Right.
Although, actually, there was a story this week that technology is now starting to exist, so I'll eat my hat on that a little bit. But, yeah, exactly. Like, the FBI should be treating this very seriously. The FBI should have, you know, whoever's in that cyber division, that online technology division, should be trained, should know what Twitter is. Right? And if not, if for some reason nobody can be caught up on what's going on the internet because they're so busy out being FBI agents that they don't have time for an online life, who knows? Maybe the spy business is 24/7 and it doesn't come with an AOL account. That's fine, but then go hire some experts. Go get the people who would understand what this is about. I mean, and this is true. This is why I shake my head on every case. This is, as you say, is why we have these segments. Is, you see judges sometimes who clearly, and obviously not every judge, but there's plenty who, like, you, sir, have never touched a computer, and we're having to try and explain this to you. And it's never in, some lawyers will try and explain, and other lawyers will try to exploit that weakness on the judge's part. And, we gotta have a legal system that's on par with.
No, I agree. And so another, the spelling, embarrassing, right? But that aside, there was another example from the file that really touched on their technical just inaptitude. They basically determined or thought that they were unable to get through a proxy server chain. So basically, how people, navigate the internet. You go through many different proxies, sometimes to hide your tracks and whatnot. But they basically thought that they couldn't go through and analyze the chain of proxy servers to identify a user.
Huh?
Exactly.
They thought they couldn't?
Exactly. They thought wrong.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's there for purposes of obfuscation.
Right.
But that makes that the riddle you're trying to crack. I mean, they absolutely have to have experts in this stuff.
Of course, it's embarrassing.
It sounds like, what probably happened was instead of calling up CSI Cyber, they called up CSI SVU. I don't know the CSIs and the Law and Orders and whatever. I bet that's what happened. Is it's the wrong folks were on this project. Well, as you say, there is a glimmer at the end of it. It sucks that this has happened and that retribution can't be found through normal channels, but we have a citizen who's going to use another path, and for understandable reasons, there's a lot of folks who say that 2018 may very well be the year of the woman. So she may find her path well lit. And here's hoping.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. You have proven yourself a worthy individual. You have 2 points on my 5-point scale of people I greatly appreciate. If you would like another half a point, it's very simple. Go to the iTunes store, look up Diginauts. Under Diginauts, give us a rating, leave a comment, help other people find this podcast. You would make yourself a 2.5. Who doesn't want that? If you want to find out how to get even further up the scale, then just tweet me and I'll let you know in a DM. Thanks very much. And finally, it's time for segment 4, Let's Dig Some More, where we go back to things that we've already talked about on the show, and we look at the recent developments. We have definitely found that environmental news and climate change news is pervasive. Every week there's something. And so that's why we start segment 4 with Darren's official omnibus offering of Mother Earth Dispatches, which is exactly what I decided to name it. And then it turned out that spelled doomed. Quite by coincidence. Sometimes we find some good stories when it comes to environment, some positive little rays of light. Mostly it's giant cloudy storms of disaster.
Little Back to the Future.
Yeah, I mean, I've said it before. I do think we'll find the science. I just wish we could be preventative about it when there's some writing on the wall. The first story that I have to mention today comes from InsideClimateNews.org, so we'll take that as a possibly biased source. That said, all they're doing is pointing out science. And in this case, they're referring to a study put together in 1979 about a model for sea ice demise in the Arctic by a climate change scientist at NASA. And basically, this person, Claire Parkinson, was putting together a model for what was going to happen to Arctic ice, and basically they've determined that what's happened is exactly what her model predicted.
Interesting.
Or his model. I'm not sure whether Claire is a man or a woman in this case.
So, do we know what the reception to her research was back then?
I don't know that. Look, I mean, it was the Reagan administration.
Right.
So, yes, we do know. I guess it would have been Carter at that exact moment. But this would have been one of the first proper scientific studies about, by the way, there's a problem. We probably were paying a lot closer attention to the ozone layer at that time.
Right.
And as a predictive model, it's basically saying, hey, in 40 years, we may have this problem if things don't change. The prediction coming out of it was, for carbon dioxide concentration to nearly double, which it hasn't quite, but the ice levels have nonetheless done as the study predicted. So I just tossed that into the survey to I guess the reason that's disheartening is that scientists have been saying so for a while, and it has fallen on some deaf ears where our government is concerned, and we're seeing that happen still. Whether you believe it's up for debate or not, whether this science is debatable, great. Let's debate the science, and as opposed to burying our heads in the sand. That's my take, but nobody asked me.
In the oil-laden sand shale.
Yeah, that's where I'll bury my head, in an oil field. Exactly.
That's fracking bad.
But hey, we've got some good news. Pun ignored. That is, or you know what? I'm not going to say it's a pun. I'm going to say it was a Battlestar Galactica reference, and I'm going to give you a benefit of the doubt. The IFL Science. If you're a fan of science news, you'll know what IFL stands for. But their site is reporting that China is going to get vertical gardens in 2018 to help tackle pollution. So this is some really cool planning that's happening. I mean, this is not new. There are examples of several places where buildings have been covered in trees. But I don't know, from friends of mine who've lived in China, they describe it as that used to be a barren plain over there, and then I turned around, and then when I turned my head back, there were 4 skyscrapers. The construction of new buildings is very efficient, and it's just the growth rate is phenomenal, or at least it was. Yeah, I bet it still is. But this plan, assuming that it goes well, could go quite a ways in terms of some of the quick numbers that they put together here. Is they're talking about a 200-meter high tower, so that's roughly 650 feet. So it's a proper skyscraper. They think tens and hundreds of thousands of trees of different sizes, and that could scrub a significant amount of CO2 out of the air, and obviously, fourth grade science here, it produce a lot more fresh, clean oxygen. So it's going to scrub some of that pollution out of the
Does it also help the buildings, either stay warmer or stay cooler?
Yeah, in general, you would expect that, depending on exactly how you place everything, especially garden roofs do that. They have insulation purposes. They affect the ecosystem of an entire city by changing the amount of sun that gets reflected, et cetera, et cetera. So you're essentially living a tiny bit more in tune with nature, so to speak. And, it's obvious, right? You cut down a forest, you put up a skyscraper, if you then put some forest back, then you're doing some amount of rebalancing. And that's not to say that everything's a finely tuned natural machine at that point, but they're going to pull 25 tons of carbon dioxide out of the air each year and produce 60 kilograms of oxygen a day, according to the firm that's, do I believe those exact numbers? Oh, but you know what? Do it for all the buildings you do from now on, and then suddenly maybe that offsets some of that coal burning. So, little positive light. The other less positive headline from National Geographic this week, or last week, was Antarctica's sea ice shrinks to new record low. The amount of ice in the world is just plain trending down. We see glaciers shrinking. We know that both ice caps are getting smaller. There was a while there that Antarctica people were like, it's actually growing. And there were several theories, one of which was that because the ice caps are melting, that changed the currents of air and water in such a way that the wind would actually cause more freezing in the south. So it's just kind of the world rebalancing itself a little bit. That's gone. So, that may continue to happen off and on, but the Arctic has continuously shrunk. Antarctic has kind of done a little bit of yo-yoing, but we're now seeing it trending back. And if you take the globe in full consideration, we are now at as National Geographic calls it, a worrying milestone. So there's my deep, heavy sigh, as is needed every week when we get to this section. We tend to be seeing, little glimmers of light, but not quite enough. As we mentioned a few weeks ago, they've done a study that says that we have to up our efforts by about tenfold if we're going to hit the Paris Accord numbers, which, again, as we know, the U.S. is leaning towards pulling out of. Hooray! That said, flying cars! Woohoo! The future! We've reached the future! Science Alert says that Dubai is set to launch the world's first hover taxis.
But are they autonomous?
They are autonomous. Yeah, exactly. So the way this works is there's a transport vehicle which amounts to essentially a person-sized drone. And it has 4 legs sticking out, each of which has 2 propellers on it. So there's an 8-propeller system capable of carrying human payload. The way they've set this up is that you get in, you type in your destination, and the drone takes you there.
Wow.
Yeah. Definitely some controversy, definitely some things people worried about. It's small at first. They're only within kind of a range of 30 minutes around the city. But they're going to alleviate their traffic by going 3D, basically.
I don't know.
Would you ride in one?
No. At some point, right? The air traffic will become a problem.
Right. So this is what's interesting about it. One of the criticisms is that unlike the driverless cars that people are testing in other parts of the world, there is no crash detection system in these. They're just connected up to a centralized computer.
Lovely.
Yeah. So one computer is handling, I'm sure it's not physically one computer, right? But
Commodore 64.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a machine or series of machines that are responsible for flight paths, and they're like, why do we need crash detection systems if we just make sure that we have perfectly functioning GPSs and we have all of the flight paths mapped out and we take people along that way? So that's what they're rolling out. There's definitely limitations. But in general, it seems like, woohoo, flying cars.
Who's funding this? The government?
So I'm not sure exactly the funding. Dubai's State Transportation Authority made the announcement. I don't know whether it's government run or whether these are individual companies that are doing it. It's a Chinese manufacturer who made the actual drones themselves. Yeah, but I mean, basically, it's it's exactly what you think. It's like the little kit drones with 4 arms, only scaled up to the size that it can carry, a human. Although I did look at the specs, and for myself and other, not sure what the politically correct term is for us, but chunky Americans, let's say, you might be able to fly in it. I'm outside the range of their specs.
What's the spec?
I don't remember, but it was like low 200s or something like that.
That's not good.
And I'm a large individual.
I'm over that.
Are you? So, I mean, it was built in China. they have a smaller average population, I guess. So that's where they set it. And at the end of the day, right, that's probably just a matter of like, okay, what is the technology physically capable of doing at this stage, right?
So at this point, is it a 1 or a 2-seater?
It's a 1-seater. You get in it by yourself. You hop in your death contraption and you fly off at an altitude of about, I want to say it was 1,000 feet. Yeah, roughly 1,000 feet. So, it's basically a personal helicopter is what it comes down to. There's who knows what's going on inside. I'm going to assume air conditioning maybe in Dubai. That said, that's got to be a drain on the main battery, right? And maybe play a little music, but there's nothing you can do to control the thing. You get in, you lean back, and it takes you to where you're going. So you put your faith in the machines, and here's hoping. So anyway, what's interesting about it to me is they're rolling out this experimental plan, and they're doing it like in July. We are literally months from a fleet of flying cars mobilizing in a major U.S. city.
U.S.?
No. Sorry. In a major world government. So I'm not sure exactly where they're, whether they're going to do it like throughout the, or I think it was, they said a 30-minute range. Anyway, point of the story is flying cars. So we'll follow up on it once it happens and get more of the information about exactly where and all that. We have to assume that they're doing, test flights. There was an interview with one of the engineers. I forget in the rabbit hole that I dug through where I found that exactly, but basically he was saying that they've already tested it with, I think it's actually in the article on Science Alert. They were testing it with all the members of their team. So the engineer was like, "Yep, I've been in it. We've done it with most of the people in our company have been in it." So they're already doing testing. They're in a phase of doing a lot more. They're basically robust testing is what happens from here to July, and then there you go. So the future is here. Let's hope that all of these run on batteries and they replace petroleum need all around the world. We'll see. But then we were going to close the show today on a couple of statements from some famous dudes in the world of technology. One was, let's see, our friend Elon Musk.
Elon Musk, indeed. So he ultimately thinks that increasingly humans and technology are merging. And we have to merge with machines, otherwise humanity is at stake. Now, he further goes on to say that this isn't as far-reaching a thought as you may think. You may think he's out of this world, but he's not. His point is that we already are ingrained with technology. He almost calls it like another layer. And ultimately says, we're already cyborgs. Almost everyone has a phone with them. It's really an extension of a human at this point, right? So you think of, what you can do with the phone, ranging from call to video to asking Siri or Cortana or Google Now questions and you get the answers, from translating things by merely pointing Google Translate at a sign, and then you understand what that really says.
Right.
So we're so dependent on technology. He calls it a digital tertiary layer already.
Right.
So basically he's saying we're already there. It's just a matter of further exploration into it, where instead of a device that's not physically tethered to you, right? Imagine being tied in, your brain being tied into a device via sensors or things like that, right? That's really the next phase.
We've talked about this before. We've talked about the idea that a lot of folks think that the next phase in evolution is humans merging with computers. And here Musk is basically saying that, it's not something that there's going to be a choice on. Like, if we want to be, if we want to continue to exist, this will happen, is basically what he's saying. I will say, because I've brought it many times, like, nope, you can't cut me in order to make this happen. You can do whatever
What if they don't have to?
Well, fine.
All right.
No poking, no breaking the skin. That's my, if it fits in my ear, fine. If it's a nose module, fine. But no breaking the skin, no needles. And he kind of says, like, look, you're already using your phone. So he's using that example. He's saying you're already a cyborg.
Right.
So in his example, when he says you're already a cyborg, he's talking about primarily phones, and that's pretty straightforward. Like, that I can accept, right? Like, oh, okay, phones I get, right? And if you want to, if they eventually get Google Glass or the Snapchat solution or whatever it is to be the right thing,
I think Microsoft has the best shot.
Well, so I saw that was getting pushed back. The AR solution out of them, there's rumors that maybe we're talking like 2019 before we realistically see anything out of them right now. And there's others like HTC who have kind of a jump on that. Who knows? I would have to look into that more. But I thought I saw something today that Microsoft was maybe a little bit further off than they were leading on. They sounds like they got some designs in the right place. And if there's any company that can be like, nope, we're hitting this deadline, thank you very much, they're probably it. So we'll have to see. But yeah, I guess anything I got to strap on my head or put me in a suit and whatever, I'm good with all those things. So I'm hoping for those kind of mergers with computers, personally. Figure out the brain scanners. Don't put a chip in my skull. My 2 cents. And then we had one more famous technologist weigh in this week, and that was...
Yeah, speaking of Microsoft, Mr. Bill Gates. Yeah. I think he also views the future in many different ways, and one of his thoughts more recently is that robots are indefinitely and already replacing thousands and millions of jobs, and that's only going to increase over time. Now, obviously, that poses a huge problem. What are all these displaced workers going to do? So what he's proposing is that any robot automation or any robots that take jobs away from humans, the companies that create that technology should be taxed, or effectively taxing the robots accordingly, and leveraging those taxes to basically retrain and do things so that the displaced human workers are not forgotten, so to speak.
Yeah, and I thought this was a really interesting idea and something I hadn't considered, right? Like, because we sort of live in this, like, world of, like, I don't have to hire you or take care of you anymore because I bought this robot that does your job. But if we as a society said, okay, that's fine, go ahead and do that if you want to, but then you have a responsibility back to society, which is effectively what taxes are. Now, I'm willing to bet that if you measure the entire political spectrum, not everyone would weigh that idea as evenly as I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two thoughts come to mind. One, corporations are already taxed. So what does this really mean, right? There's a lot of things to figure out from that perspective. And then from another perspective, so if you're taxing, and if it's taxing above and beyond taxes already, what happens to innovation? am I now deterred from creating innovation because I'll only be taxed more because I'm being more efficient and making more money?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is again, we have this in the Dig Some More column. We've discussed this a little bit before, that like the safe jobs in the future will be robot repairmen and robot designers, right? So,
Right.
The innovation is going to come out of those robot designers. And I'm being flippant when I say it. I think that we're going to have entire fields around innovation in automation and AI. And that's going to be supporting. The jobs that are getting replaced by that automation are going to be, middle-class jobs or lower-class jobs. And the idea that then feeds back into a government, I mean, the other way to think about it would be to use the analogy of Amazon, right? When you first buy robots and displace your entire workforce, it's a big savings, one, because of the gain in efficiency, but two, because of the reduction in payroll. And payroll is not just about salaries. A significant portion of taking on an employee is their insurance and their payroll taxes, right?
Yeah.
So I think the reason he's proposing this is he's basically saying, okay, so shift the payroll taxes over to robot taxes. The company hasn't lost anything in terms of their monetary output. The government gains funds in order to be able to help the displaced workers, and the company still gets the net gains in efficiency via their workforce. So I think that's probably where that comes from. And the reason that makes sense to me is to think of something like Amazon. When they first come out and they disrupt the whole system of, hey, you no longer go to a store, right? Because our old model was you had to go to a store to buy a light bulb, and now you don't. And honest to God, I would order light bulbs on Amazon. And
I have.
Absolutely. And there was a while there where there was no tax on that because it came from a different state, right? From an old model of shipping mail order catalogs, right? So we've sort of slowly caught up with that and said, wait, that's not sustainable. Not if we want there to be stores anymore, right? Plus, if we replace all the stores, then the income that the government was getting off of sales tax goes away completely once you replace that with an advantaged entity that had a good decade without that, right? So same thing's true here, right? So the car manufacturers have had years of not getting taxed on their robots. So now we tax the robots, we take care of humans, even if it goes into something like what we were talking about recently with Finland's bottom line economy or whatever. I personally don't think that works against, even the kind of the Republican point of view of like, everybody should have to work for a living. Well, you got displaced. Let's make sure there's enough money that you can get training to now go be a robot designer. And then everybody will work. But, again, that's, first of all, here it comes one more time. No one asked me. Or whatever my tagline is. And then the other side of it is obviously we're living in a divisive political environment where nobody's going to be like, oh, well, he likes taxes for the reasons of saving people and making sure everybody's taken care of. Cool. So I'm sure that everybody will argue for some reason that the Second Amendment defends their rights to buy robots and displace people. All right, so that's all we have for you today. We'd love to hear what your take is. Should robots be taxed? Do you want to move beyond the cell phone level into just plain old strapping yourself into that matrix and joining with the computers? Let us know about everything that we talked about today and what your take is. You can reach us. Our Twitter is at Good Talk Network, or individually, I am at Digital Darren.
And I'm Matt E. Fader.
We are at 323 686-8255. Feel free to leave a voicemail. We would happily involve all of your insightful commentary in future episodes. We'd be happy to play that into the show. So yeah, join the conversation. We appreciate you listening to us. By all means, do go to iTunes Store or wherever you listen to this podcast and give us a positive rating. It helps a lot to get the word out. And thanks very much. Good talk.